Sorry, I don't have a pithy opening for this one. To get the opening statement that everybody is expecting out of the way, I never wanted to make a video like this. I don't like talking straight up politics, and there's a reason I usually filter these conversations through the lens of media analysis, but I have to do this, and I have to do it bluntly. Because things have already gotten so bad so quickly and will get worse. And if I don't say something, that fact is going to hang over me and weigh down everything I do until I say what I need to say. This sort of video isn't going to be what the channel becomes. But I can't, in good conscience, talk about things like Doctor Who or Star Wars or Marvel or whatever else without knowing I've said something about what's happening. This channel, going forward, will still be what it's always been, and maybe it'll be a refuge for some of you. It often is for me. But I can't be silent today. Finally, before we get too far into this, I don't want anyone to think that my talking about trans issues is implying that the stomping on trans rights is the only or even the biggest problem that's going on right now. It's what I'm going to focus on, but yeah. Right now, everything is getting worse for anyone who isn't worth at least $100 million. And that harm is exponentially worse for marginalized groups, be they immigrants, people of color, people with disabilities, on and on and on and on. And the fact that Trump and his cronies shout DEI over literally everything, with the right's current use of DEI being probably the most unsubtle dog whistle yet for literally anyone who isn't straight white male, cisgender, non-disabled, and ideally Christian. It shows the utter contempt for all of us that we are held in. I know we are all in danger, but I can't cover all of it. And part of Trump's strategy appears to be to have a new wave of awful things every single day so that we get overwhelmed and freeze up or burn out. And I worry that what's happening to trans people is going to get lost amid the circus of things like the Indiana Jones bad guy salute and trying to make Canada the 51st state. In many ways, this is going to be a follow-up to the video I made about trans genocide 2 years ago. I'm not going to reiterate too much of that because it's not really out of date. The specific laws and policies that I cited are a bit older now, but just realize that since then, much worse ones have come along, so go ahead and check that video if you need to, and then realize things are several measures of magnitude worse than when I made that. Now, as then, I cannot even begin to be comprehensive about this, even narrowing it down to what's happening to trans people. But I can highlight some specifics and try to get more people aware of what it is that's going on. So, some highlights of what Trump has ordered in the last month or so. The removal of any recognition within the federal government that there are more than two sexes or genders, and the insistence that it is an unchangeable feature of a person. Now, I know some folks made fun of this one because the wording of sex being assigned at conception technically defines everyone as a woman because male characteristics don't develop until sometime after that, but forgive me for not finding a technical error in a document erasing the validity of my identity to be particularly funny or comforting. The intent with this order has been pushed so far that federal workers have been told to remove pronouns from email signatures, even though that's straightforwardly a practical matter because even disregarding trans issues, some names like Alex or Taylor could belong to either a man or a woman, and it might help to know that. This same executive order includes the removal of any gender-affirming health care granted to inmates, effectively forcibly detransitioning anyone in the prison system who is on a hormone regimen, a physically traumatic, forced change to their bodies that should fit comfortably under any definition of cruel and unusual punishment. This same order also requires the rescinding of any documents or guidance supporting or affirming the trans community in any way, including such works as Supporting Intersex Students, a resource for students, families, and educators, U.S. Department of Education Toolkit, Creating Inclusive and Non-Discriminatory School Environments for LGBTQI+ students, and Confronting Anti-LGBTQI+ Harassment in Schools, a resource for students and families. Obviously, those are harmful documents. This same order forbids the changing of gender markers on federal documents, such as passports, and requires that any that have been changed be reset. We will come back to this one. There's been an order to end any and all federal support for trans-supportive health care of any kind to anyone under the age of 19. And yes, this would include anyone at the age of 18 who are adults under the law. It's worth stressing that this does not ban procedures or medications, strictly speaking, as nearly all gender-affirming care and medications have multiple uses and are distributed without issue for care for other conditions as well as gender-related ones. For example, I'm on spironolactone as a testosterone blocker. It's also frequently prescribed to treat high blood pressure and prevent heart failure. So what is being banned is not the medicine, strictly speaking, because by and large, the medicine is effective and safe. But very specifically, the use of these things in gender-affirming care. And naturally, on the day that I'm recording this, there is word of a coming order to ban trans athletes, specifically from women's sports in schools and colleges. In an executive order aimed at overhauling the military, there was naturally targeting of trans service members. It is not technically an outright ban of them from the military. However, it does set the stage for that, stating a member of the military being transgender, quote, conflicts with a soldier's commitment to an honorable, truthful, and disciplined lifestyle, even in one's personal life. The clear implication being that being transgender at all is dishonorable and untruthful by nature, and that those identifying as trans, quote, cannot satisfy the rigorous standards necessary for military service. Now, at present, most of what's happening, and not just to trans folks, is happening through executive orders. These are effectively memos from the Office of the President, some of which result in immediate action in the areas he has direct jurisdiction over, some of which are massive overreaches of power that are already being challenged in the courts, which will at least delay their implementation. We've already seen this in action as his attempt to revoke the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship is currently being blocked by the courts. Not to be a downer on this, but the courts stepping in should not be taken as a mark of comfort. The current Supreme Court, where much of this will ultimately end up, has already shown its willingness to throw out decade-old statutes in favor of far more conservative ones in direct conflict to the previous norms. So while the court process will slow things down, we should at least be preparing for every single executive order he's signing, be they about trans folks or anything else, to ultimately be upheld by the Supreme Court, even though some likely won't be. But let's get into the practical outcomes. And we'll start by circling back onto the issue of passports. Many trans people who've been trying to get updates to their passports done before something like this happened are now reporting their passports are being held up. Now, I need you to understand that when you seek to get your passport changed in any way or renew it any earlier than a year out from its expiration date, you have to submit your current passport before they will send you a new one. With the State Department currently blocking these changes to passports, that means there are a significant number of trans people who effectively cannot leave the country. I will repeat that. For as long as updating passports is blocked and until the original passports are returned, if ever, there are trans people who likely were actively seeking the ability to safely leave the United States should it become necessary. Their passports have been effectively confiscated, removing their ability to leave for any reason, including their own safety. In the same vein, the State Department's page on international travel has removed the previous LGBTQI+ designation and replaced it with LGB, literally erasing the identities of trans, queer, and intersex people. The word trans no longer appears on the site at all, and if you search for it, you'll be asked if you meant to search for trains. Lest you think it's somewhat petty for me to focus on the changing of labels on a website, particularly in the face of the effective passport confiscation, it is important because it is erasure in a very literal sense. The acknowledgement of our existence is being erased and discussion of us is being removed. Inside Medicine was able to obtain an email sent to the CDC requiring them to remove any reference to gender identity or transgender status from any and all scientific papers, regardless of the point of those. The exact wording considers the following to be forbidden terms: gender, transgender, pregnant person, pregnant people, LGBT, transsexual, non-binary, spelled two different ways, assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth, biological male and biological female. This is politicians dictating to scientists and doctors the words and terms they are forbidden from using. And yes, it does include the simple word gender as well as biological male and biological female, hampering researchers' abilities to clearly and accurately discuss even the most basic elements of research and patient care. Anything that deviates even slightly from the limited scope of what Trump and his ghouls believe defines the sexes is being erased from the records. We are being unpersoned. And while it is true that we will remain trans and exist as trans people, regardless of whether we are allowed to be called that, this is an extremely dark turn. Because if you deny the very existence of a person, it becomes, from your perspective, impossible for your actions to be seen as harming that kind of person. They're not real, after all. To remove our acknowledgement is to remove our humanity, to create a world in which we either go back in the closet, something this administration and its backers know full well will result in a massive spike in self-harm and suicide, or if we don't go back into the closet, then we don't really even count as people. If what we are is named, then we are real. And if we are real, then we have rights. Erase all references to us. Now you don't even have to worry about the optics of crushing our rights. You don't have to answer to charges of oppressing a group you won't even acknowledge exists. You don't have to take that any more seriously than somebody saying, oh, you're oppressing them because they're an elf. It's not a sophisticated tactic. Trolls in my comments section were pulling this one back in 2020, claiming that they can't be transphobic because trans people aren't really a thing. But it doesn't have to be sophisticated to work, especially when the man in charge is essentially an internet troll and he's handing huge swaths of the government to a man who is openly and proudly an internet troll, and the checks and balances meant to keep them from doing whatever it is they want are all under control of Trump's political party. And in that case, a troll tactic can be brute forced into actual policy. And you need to know it's going to get worse. And it's already indefensibly bad. The reason to erase acknowledgement of a population is to make it easier to do the worst things that you intend to do to them. I expect we aren't far off from a banning of trans-affirming healthcare for adults, starting with forbidding any gender-affirming treatments from anyone of any age in a federally funded program like Medicaid or Medicare, or insurance plans provided to federal employees or military personnel. And then it'll expand out from there, and they'll put pressure on private insurers and doctors. And every single one of these things, he said he would do. Every single person who voted for him has to own this. And it doesn't matter what the rationale is that you had for voting for him, if you did. He said he would do these things. You heard him say he would do these things. And even if you voted for him because of the price of fucking eggs, you decided the price of eggs was more important than the lives of other people. This is your fault. And I will not absolve you. And yes, that does regrettably mean there are members of my own family that I never want to see again. No matter what you were to me in the past, if you voted for this, you voted my future and even my present away. And you are not entitled to a presence in my life. That said, I do see people on the left reveling in schadenfreude and laughing at TikToks from Trump voters, panicking at services and benefits they depend on being stripped from them. I'm not incapable of seeing the irony, but I can't even take a, hey, you asked for this, now you got it. Oh, never thought the leopards would eat my face kind of dark pleasure in that. I can't. For those voters, I will not forgive them, but I don't want them to suffer. I don't want anyone to suffer. And I can't see something like that and not be painfully aware that there's a ton of other people having the same benefits stripped from them who didn't vote for this. That even the people who did vote for this, many of them have children. Those children certainly didn't vote for this. And even if that wasn't the case, I still wouldn't want them to suffer. I want people to be able to live. And I won't let my hate shape me the way they let theirs shape them. But even as everything gets worse for everyone, I still feel the need to highlight what is happening to trans people. And it's not just because I am trans, but because many of the most sweeping changes, like the aforementioned birthright citizenship, are going to get hung up, not only by the court system, but also by Republican infighting. Many of these orders won't have much force behind them without new supporting bills from Congress. The GOP may indeed control Congress, but it is by such a thin margin that it only takes a few of them deciding that they aren't getting what they want and they can just jam up the whole system. A lot like Joe Manchin kept doing to the Democrats when they had control of the Senate. The reality is huge swaths of this party can't stand each other. And a lot of things that some of them want are going to rile others up. Not in huge numbers, but at least sometimes in enough numbers that it'll slow things down or possibly even halt some things before they get off the ground. You remember how, even with full control of Congress at the start of Trump's first term, they couldn't agree on how to repeal the Affordable Care Act, so it just never happened? Or how long it took to get a new Speaker of the House in place after the far right threw a hissy fit and booted the previous one? That sort of thing will be the case for at least some of this stuff. But it won't be the case for trans rights. Because outside of a very small number of governors and state-level legislators, nobody in the Republican Party has or will stand up for trans rights. It's one of the only things they are fully united on doing, with no real disagreement about how it should be done, because they don't care. The Republicans that don't actively hate us have no reason to obstruct the ones who do. So what happens to trans people will happen faster and more aggressively than possibly any other group. In many ways, we are the canary in the coal mine for how bad things are liable to get for every minority group the Republicans have targeted, which is basically every minority group except the wealthy. First, they came for the trans people, and I did not speak out. You know how this goes. And even if you're not trans, or even if you don't care about trans people, even if you care about a single vulnerable group, you should be paying attention to what's going on. Because we are the test run for how far they can push things. As to what can we do about it, right now, not a lot. The Democratic Party was barely supportive of the trans community in the first place and have already signaled their willingness to let Trump burn the country to the ground in the hope that it means they'll start winning elections again later on. They'll act outraged, point at what he's doing, and fail to offer a plan of action to do anything other than point and be outraged. Yes, come the midterms, we need to vote Democrat, if only for the barest hope of survival. But we also need better Democrats. Honestly, we need a better party altogether, but the potential for breaking the two-party system stranglehold on this country is not something I see as being within even the most optimistic of reaches. Yes, we need to protest and shout and fight and make it clear that we know what they're doing and we're not okay with it, because to do otherwise is to signal that nobody's going to fight them on this. But these protests are unlikely to have meaningful change so long as a party that doesn't care if trans people live or die, and also don't care what anyone thinks about what they do, has control of all three branches of government. Yes, we need to embrace and celebrate those willing to actually state openly and forcefully that we exist and deserve rights, even as those statements are unlikely to move the needle. We need to do whatever we can to hold on, because the alternative is to give them exactly what they want and accept the fate of being eradicated from public life entirely. I, for one, am willing to keep going out of the sheer spite of knowing that every day in which I exist publicly as myself, it makes them so fucking mad. If you're trans, please do whatever you can to get into a safe situation and to take care of yourself. If you are not trans and you want to know what to do, mostly start small and start local. If you have trans friends, support them in any way that you are able to do. If you have a local queer-focused advocacy group, contact them and ask them what will help. There is only so much that any one person can do about the national level. And I don't need what allies we have burning themselves out, pounding their fists on the wall of the federal government. Help as you can, focus local. If you don't have local organizations, then support Trans Lifeline, the Human Rights Campaign, and similar groups as best you can, be it through monetary donations or volunteering. Do what you can, keep yourself safe, and hold on to each other. I want nothing more than to offer optimism. But for at the very least the next 2 years, I don't realistically have any. But I can say that whenever you find joy, no matter how small, hold on to it. Because queer joy is the strongest counter we have right now, making it clear that we won't just roll over into silent misery the way they want us to. For me, I have a family that I cherish, wonderful partners, good friends. And also what's been surprisingly helpful, while this seems like a small thing, I made myself a Defiance playlist. Songs that make me feel like I'm standing up and saying, no, I love living and I won't be pushed away. And it has some of the stuff you might expect. Killing in the Name of by Rage Against the Machine, T-Rex from the Nimona soundtrack, What's Up Danger from the Into the Spider-Verse soundtrack. But most of the playlists is stuff that just calls on you to be unapologetically and raucously yourself. The Greatest Show, Raise Your Glass, and yeah, Pink Pony Club. It brings me joy. It keeps me going. Find what keeps you going. Thank you for listening. If you have made it to the end, it's very important to me, now more than ever, that you be well, be safe, be kind, and remember that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved.